I'm going to just talk to you. I'm going to show you some slides and some video and talk about what we did originally to market Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back. Originally. Imagine back in 1976. Today, it seems like almost every movie is science fiction, fantasy, horror, some kind of genre movie. In 1976, God, I feel like the president. Back in 1976, people were not interested in science fiction movies. There had not been what was thought of as an adult science fiction movie really since 2001, which came out in 1968. There were a couple of other things like Silent Running, which was what, 73, I think, something like that. But pretty much science fiction, not interested. In fact, 20th Century Fox's market research people did a study. They went out to people on Hollywood Boulevard and places like that and asked them to look at a list of genres. Westerns, romance, crime stories, etc., 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 including science fiction. And to vote for the ones they were interested in seeing. Science fiction, way down on the list. People just weren't interested.
What do they know?
Well, what they knew was the movies that had been coming out at that time, which were mostly not very good. Or they were very juvenile, they were done cheaply, a lot of them were mostly guy in rubber suit monster movies. Now, I love Godzilla, but guy in rubber suit monster movies are not big with the American public. But 20th Century Fox went ahead anyway and made Star Wars. Star Wars was a modest budget for its time, originally $9.5 million, eventually it went all the way up to $10.5 million. And we had a very, very tiny marketing budget. Lucasfilm, which was the Star Wars Corporation at that point, handled all of the publicity, advertising, licensing, etc., in conjunction with Fox, but we had the overall charge. The company didn't have a lot of money, so there was one guy named Charlie Lippincott who ran all those different areas for the company. Basically anything that wasn't actually making the movie, Charlie was in charge of. He didn't have much of a budget for hiring long, experienced people, so he hired me to work with him. I was just out of college. I was a long-time science fiction fan, and I'd known Charlie and gave him some advice when he first was showing up at science fiction conventions, and we're going to talk about that. But he hired me, and I ended up working on Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back at Lucasfilm. And then, just to fill out what I've been doing since then, I left Lucasfilm right after Empire Strikes Back. I was an independent consultant on publicity and licensing to Jim Henson, Warner Brothers, Disney, Universal, lots of companies, lots of movies, Superman, Altered States, The Thing, Excalibur, Splash, a lot of the big science fiction movies of the 80s. And then I became an animation writer. Some of you were in here a minute ago for the Voltron presentation. I've spent the last 30 years writing and producing television animation. But this is back at the beginning. Let's see if I can make this work. Oh, boy, I can. And this is kind of my take on what we did in marketing. It isn't all about me, but I can mostly tell you about what I was involved with. This presentation was originally put together. I was a guest speaker at a festival in Spain last year, and we put this together for them. Okay, that's me on the ice cave set in England, the Hawk ice cave set during production on Empire Strikes Back. And talking to Billy D. Williams, and just to give you my actually bona fides, to tell you why I'm doing that. Me, Gary Kurtz, who was the producer on Empire, Mark Marshall, my assistant, and Irv Kirshner, who was the director. Me and Gary. This was at the World Science Fiction Convention. I have to apologize. I don't know much about PowerPoint. This show was put together by someone else who put some of the photos in the wrong order. My old computer was kind of steam-powered, and so now that I have a new computer with a modern PowerPoint, we're actually going to adapt this and improve it. But you're getting the version 1.0. And that's from the after Empire Strikes Back screening for the company, me and George at our party. So let's get started. Star Wars was the very first movie to be presented to fans, directly to fans, and not just advertised the original way. Again, we didn't have a lot of money. One of the things we wanted to do was go to the people we thought who would like Star Wars, especially once they saw it wasn't another cheap, quickie movie made by people who didn't like science fiction, but was what we thought, and obviously you did too, a good movie. This is me actually at the 1979 San Diego Comic-Con doing the Empire Strikes Back presentation. We actually started in 1976 at the WonderCon, which is the West Coast Science Fantasy Convention in Los Angeles. That was July 4th weekend, 76. Then later in, I guess, August, Comic-Con was in August at that point, we came to Comic-Con in San Diego, and later, and I'll show you some slides of both of these, we went to the World Science Fiction Convention, which that year was in Kansas City. This is a photo of Mark Hamill at that exhibit. We did an exhibit at the World Science Fiction Convention in Kansas City, and that was Mark there. That was R2 and 3PO at that convention. Remember, at this point, no one had seen Star Wars. No one had seen anything from Star Wars, not even the early trailers, not the novelization, certainly not the comic books. So this was their first introduction. This was their hardcore science fiction fans seeing the actual products. Now at the WonderCon and Comic-Con and in San Diego and at WorldCon, we showed slides and video. We also started the Star Wars fan club, the official Star Wars fan club, which I was the head of. I wrote all the issues of the newsletter for the first 2 or 3 years, did all the interviews, all of that. Again, these are not quite in the right order, and I apologize for that. That's in one of our production offices in England, where I had to sort 10,000 35mm slides for the film, looking for photos we wanted to use. And what goes here? Underbooze commercial. Okay. Boy, is this in the wrong order. Yeah, we did a lot of stuff. Besides the kind of stuff I'm talking about, we also did commercials. I was producer for Lucasfilm on some of our licensee commercials, and when we put the robots on Sesame Street, I'll show you a little of that in a moment as well, and I produced them. And let's see if this will actually play. And the answer seems to be no. Okay. Oh well. It's played before.
Go back.
I don't know how to do that. But let me tell you a little bit about this commercial. In E.T., you know the movie E.T.? There's a little girl in school who kisses Elliot. That was her first movie role. Her first television role was, we need to go back and see if we can get that to play. Okay, we'll see if I can make it work. Anyway, we had boys in their underwear dancing with C-3PO, and little girls in their underwear dancing with R2-D2. And I not only was the producer for Lucasfilm, I was one of the two operators on R2-D2, which actually I think, for me, was much cooler than being the producer, was getting to operate R2-D2. You think it'll work?
Keep going with the music antidote
Okay.
stuff.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
keep going.
Okay, here we go. No, okay. Well, you'll see in a moment. This was amazing because like these kids, they brought out, there she is. They brought out a choreographer from New York, a Broadway choreographer, and I think the little brunette girl must have been somebody's daughter because she could not dance. And at one point, the two girls cross, and R2 comes out between them, and they were in, and as we were doing that shot, they were in the wrong place, and from my point off to the side, operating R2-D2, I said, cut, and the director got pissed off at me, and I said, the girls are out of place, we were going to hit them. And he said, these girls are professionals. They won't be there when the robot gets there. Don't call cut again. I said, okay. And we started the playback again, and the girls started dancing, and R2 ran over the little brunette girl. Actually, he just ran into her and knocked her down, but because they were not in place. But eventually, it all worked, and I got to tell you, felt like I was making kiddie porn. You know, these are like 8-year-old girls in their underwear doing Bob Fosse hip thrusts. It's just very weird. Okay, well, let's keep going. This is a shot from operating R2 on something else. For the Star Wars fan club, we created a number of items to help market the film, and this was mostly to help keep interest going before Empire. And one of the things, this was a special poster that Ralph McQuarrie painted that I actually designed and worked with Ralph on, that we gave away to people who joined the Star Wars fan club. And we have Steve, are you still in here somewhere? Yeah, Steve York, who is one of the master collectors of all things Star Wars, brought 2 posters from the fan club there that if we'll figure out how, and we'll give 2 of these away later. And I thank Steve for bringing them and making them available for us. About the first year and a half of the fan club, I think. I think they changed. Bob, you would know.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, they changed to a different poster. Yeah. So I don't know how many they were limited to, but they didn't make that many, and they were never available commercially. No. My wife is holding the posters. A couple of years ago, for my birthday, got a little statue made of me in carbonite based on a photo of me on the carbonite stage. So it looks like I looked on that stage, although it's much shorter. Anyway, we're getting to the original marketing. This is the San Diego Comic-Con 1976. in a room much like this, but much smaller. San Diego Comic-Con in 1976 was maybe 2,000, 2,500 people, something like that.
Wow.
Star Wars was completely unknown. This was early, I think early August of 76. And so we scheduled this presentation on the program. In order to get people to show up, because preview of Star Wars, that was not really going to bring a lot of people in, we brought in Roy Thomas and Howard Chaykin, who were the writer and artist on the Star Trek comic books, because at Comic-Con, which was then mainly oriented towards comics, they were big name guys who would bring in an audience. And that's what you see on the right, Roy with the microphone in his hand, and Howard sitting next to him. On the far left is Charlie Lippincott, who was the main, as I said, publicist on Star Wars. There you see a good shot of Roy and Howie looking like it really is the 70s. And behind them on the screen, you can see the artwork that they did, Howard did, for the cover of the first issue of the comic, and also for the original poster that we gave out. We sold some of them, we gave out a lot of them. It was about a half-size poster, I forget the exact dimensions, but not very large. That artwork, and it said Star Wars #1 in a series, collect them all. It was the only one in the series. And relatively few people collected them because now it is one of the most expensive posters for poster and Star Wars collectors. Steve, do you know what our current price is? $2,000 to $3,000. Yeah, even the ones we sold were $1.75. If only you'd kept them. Sesame Street. Yeah, we put Star Wars and the Star Wars robots on Sesame Street. Again, it's marketing for the film. I again was the producer for Lucasfilm and was one of the two operators of R2. We brought Tony Daniels in from London, and I realized a week before we were shooting that no one had arranged for a visa for Tony. So I tried to figure out how could we get a visa in a week, especially because when I called the immigration people, they said, oh, it's a guy in a costume. His face isn't seen. You can hire anyone to do it. We won't grant you a special visa. Because you need, like an actor, you need a visa that says they're a special person to bring them in. They have a special skill. And I said, well, you know, it's like molded to his body. He's world famous for being this character. Oh, no, his face is covered. Can't bring him in. So what could we do? So I tried to think about who was high in government that I could call and put pressure on them. And I thought, well, Amy Carter is a big Star Wars fan. For those of you not old enough to know who Amy Carter is, her father was president at the time. But I thought calling her was too indirect. She had to go to daddy, you know, take too long. So I called Alan Cranston, who was the senior senator from California at the time, and was one of the big backroom deal makers in Congress. And I explained to his aide what was going on. World's favorite children's characters to be on the world's favorite children's TV show in, as it turned out, the International Year of the Child. Can't they help? And they said, sure, call this number at immigration. And I called the number at immigration, and they said, well, no, I'm sorry, he's a guy in a mask. We can't really do anything. It'll take 6 weeks to get the visa. And I said, well, Senator Cranston said you could take care of this for me. And they said, hold on. And about 10 minutes later, they came back and said, can you have someone here this afternoon to sign the papers? And I said, sure. And I called the general counsel, that's the head lawyer for Children's Television Workshop, who produced Sesame Street, and said, I just discovered your people screwed up and didn't get Tony a visa. I fixed it. You have to go down to the immigration office or send someone there to sign the papers. And we knew, and he agreed, and they sent someone over there, but we knew that Alan Cranston really had power because they got a federal civil servant to stay late on a Friday in order to be there for him to sign the papers. He got there, he signed the papers, the visa was sent to the American Embassy in London. The car picked Tony up, drove to the American consulate, picked up his visa, and took him to the airport. And so it all worked out. So that's me and the other guy operating onto Sesame Street. And here you can see Tony only partially dressed in his costume, and R2 on stage with the actors and the director working out the staging. And as you might guess, that's me, of course, with Big Bird. All of my crew from Star Wars wanted their pictures taken with Big Bird. No one at Sesame Street could give a damn about having a photo with Big Bird. They saw him every day. They all wanted their photos taken with R2 and 3PO. And how are we on time?
You're half past.
Okay. Can I just, guys in the back, if I just tap on this, will it play? Click on it? Okay.
You clicked the wrong thing.
I clicked what it looked like. I'm sorry. I told you it's a new computer and I don't know nothing about Birth and no PowerPoint.
Keep going with the amusing anecdotes.
Oh, okay. Well, this is just, oh, there we go.
You probably won't get any sound.
Okay. Well, I'll just describe this. It's fairly quick. We shot about 6 or 8 segments, one full episode of Sesame Street with lots of stuff intercut. You know, Sesame Street doesn't do one story. They do, here's a bit, and then some other stuff, and here's a bit. So we did that, and then we did a lot of wild stuff that they dropped in other episodes. R2 tells Big Bird that he's in love, and Big Bird, he tells Big Bird and C-3PO that he's in love. And they're like, what? Oh, well, who, what? What's going on? And they're all talking about being in love and how good that is and things like that. And stuff keeps happening and they keep talking. I forget exactly what they're saying at this point. What? What?
The beep beep one.
No.
Yeah, this is the beep beep one. I'm sorry.
Is it beep beep?
Beep beep
Oh,
one.
well. Okay, in that case, it's all about counting. And R2 and 3PO sing a counting song because Big Bird can't get his numbers straight. And C-3PO thinks, if you go 1, you go beep, and R2 beeps. If it's 2, you go and R2 goes beep beep. And we go through this a few times and help kids learn to count by beeping. The R2 in love sequence was he falls in love with a mailbox. Sesame Street sent me a lot of scripts to approve, and I actually had to reject several. They did one where instead of this counting thing, which is beep, 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 they wanted to sing the alphabet song. I said, no, R2 can't talk. And they said, oh no, but we could use a synthesizer. And you know, when it's A, he can go A, and then for B, he can go B. And I said, no, if he can make A, B, C sounds, he can talk. And we can't have him knowing how to talk, so we had to cut through stuff like that. And, okay, so that was going on. Yeah, you're right, this is the Beat song because he's dancing. R2 is not the best dancer. You should see his tango. It's awful. Can't get the leg movement. And now Big Bird has figured it out. You know, it's funnier without the sound. We did all kinds of things, and unfortunately I don't think I have a recording of this on this show. We'll be adding it. One of the things we did was a series of 800 number calls. You would call 800-521-1980, which happened to be the date The Empire Strikes Back was coming out. And you would get a recording from Luke Skywalker or Princess Leia, Han Solo, C-3PO, or Darth Vader telling you about the next movie. And I wrote and produced all those, and we recorded them during the looping session, except for the Han Solo one, which Harrison had already done his looping, so I took a sound guy, we went up to Harrison's house and just recorded him doing it. And actually, if you go to my Facebook page, you can find all of these recordings and separately all of the outtakes from all these recording sessions, which are pretty funny. But all we did is I announced them at science fiction conventions, Comic-Con, and remember, in 1979, when I did the Empire Strikes Back presentation, Comic-Con was 6,000 people. That's fewer people than fit in Hall H today. And so you would call that number, and it was announced in a short article, like a 2-inch article, as a sidebar in Starlight. That was all the marketing we did on it. Back then, telephones were not computerized. If you called a phone number, it was a mechanical switcher that connected you to a number. And 800 numbers, which did exist, of course, were located where that exchange was. 521 was the prefix in Denver. So for us to do these calls and have that number, our phone room was in Denver. And so your phone call would connect you to the Denver Telephone Company office. Back then it was all AT&T, the only phone company. And you would get the message from Luke or whoever telling you about what was going on. Well, unfortunately, for the phone company, Star Wars was very popular. Even with only announcements at conventions, there were so many phone calls that came in that we shut down the 800 number system for the entire state of Colorado. They could not the number of calls coming in to even give busy signals. They gave busy signals. It gave your number didn't go through. They gave whatever sounds and recordings they could do, and it still wasn't enough. It completely overloaded the system. No 800 numbers in Colorado were receiving calls, and AT&T demanded that we seesaw advertising, which was easy, add additional phone lines to handle the calls, which was fine, and apologize. That was key. We hadn't counted on that. We just thought we'd get the publicity from fans for the phone calls. We had to issue press releases announcing that Star Wars fans were so dedicated and interested in the next Star Wars movie, AT&T couldn't handle all the phone calls. We got more publicity from that than any advertising we could have bought. Things are so much easier with the internet. Now, okay, we're moving on to other movies I worked on, and I'm not going to talk about that. But I will tell you about one thing. And this is something that was a little Easter egg that the effects guys did. And I had thought by now everyone knew about it. But when we were putting this show together last year, a lot of very hardcore Star Wars fans said, "What, really?" And then when I made it all public, a lot of people said, "Oh yeah, I saw that, I knew about that." And maybe they did. After all, I thought it was well known. And maybe you know about it, and maybe not. In the days before home video and frame-by-frame advancing, you couldn't really see this unless you were really paying attention. This is in the asteroid field chase, the TIE fighters after the Millennium Falcon. And this runs for about 18 frames, so like 3/4 of a second. And the TIE fighter collides with the asteroid. And look, see that little dark squiggle in the umbra? That's the pilot of the TIE fighter being thrown out into space.
Cool. Wow.
So, that's a little Easter egg. You may or may not have known about it beforehand. And now you will never not see it. You can see that scene. But we were very dedicated to getting fans involved. We gave out May the Force Be With You buttons. We gave out those triangle t-shirts and later other t-shirts. This is both on Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back, because we were kind of inventing what now is standard. You're the most dedicated people for science fiction and comic book movies. You actually spend time and money going to comic book and maybe science fiction conventions. Even your friends who aren't interested in comic books and science fiction might say, "Hey, I heard about this new science fiction movie. You must have heard about it. Is it any good?" And there you would be, part of our fan base for almost a year before the movie came out. I mean, we hoped that you would get excited about it the way we did. And you'd be telling people, you'd be telling other science fiction and comic book fans, you'd be telling non-fans about it, you'd be wearing our billboard on your shirt, you'd be wearing our buttons, you'd be doing all that. We wanted you to like it, we wanted you to tell other people, because no one was interested in science fiction movies at that time. So we were doing as much as we could to promote the movie. Now the movie turned out to be pretty good. Time magazine called it, the week before it came out, called Star Wars Best Movie of the Year, and we were scheduled to be the cover story on Time magazine, but unexpectedly Menachem Begin was elected president of Israel and knocked us off the cover at the last minute. But there's still, on that issue of Time magazine, there's like an 8 or 10 page article inside, and on the cover of the magazine there's a snipe showing one of the vehicles, and it still says Best Movie of the Year on it, promoting the movie. So other people, once they started seeing it, and then, we opened in 32 theaters around the country, different parts of the country. Lots of long lines to get in to see it. This got a lot of press because that never happened at that time. People didn't wait in line. So we got more press that way, and that got people interested. That got people into the theaters to see it. Star Wars was a huge hit. We were originally at the Chinese Theater in Hollywood. We were booked in for a short run, followed by Sorcerer, which was a big prestige action, kind of an action movie, sort of I'm not quite sure how to describe Sorcerer, but it's about, it's you know, a truck that might explode, basically, is what the movie is. Very well-made movie, not a big hit. As soon as the box office on that dipped below the contractual minimum, they yanked it out of the Chinese theater and put Star Wars back in. Because Star Wars was making money for theaters. The theaters that put in 70mm projection for Star Wars, and this is after it started spreading nationwide, or wider in each city, they were making more money, more extra money, enough to pay for those 70mm projectors just on the money they made from Star Wars compared to 35mm houses in their same cities. More people wanted to see it in 70mm. And the theaters that did it then had essentially free 70mm projectors for all future movies. So it was really good. And I knew Star Wars had really captured the American audiences. One day, 3 of us from Lucasfilm were sitting in a pizza place. We were sitting in the back room, a regular room, but it was just the rear room of the restaurant that wasn't very occupied. And there were like 2 other tables in that room with people in it. And one of them was a table with 3 long-haul truckers having lunch. And the people who operate the pizza place came in to close out the extra register that they had back there. And it was an early electronic cash register that made lots of beeping and booping noises as it tabulated everything and printed out its special informative receipts and stuff. And as it was making these noises, one of the truckers turned to his friends and said, "Look, it's R2-D2. And I knew when those guys were making R2-D2 jokes, everyone was coming to see Star Wars. And that's all I have to show you today. We'll take any questions. Yes?
In dealing with the licensing, what was probably one of the weirdest or oddest or something you said absolutely no to that you wouldn't associate the Star Wars franchise with?
God, we got a lot of odd stuff. You know, back in those days, we had a rule. Anything that was just slapping a picture from Star Wars on it, our classic example, the example we always used was, you had a comb and brush set, and Style 12 had, you know, stickers of Snow White on the handle, and you want to do Style 14 with the Star Wars robots on the handle. We said no to that. We didn't want to do anything that wasn't somehow intrinsically Star Wars. A brush with the handle in the shape of R2-D2, that we do. And there were a few things like cereal bowls that just had the artwork in it. But mostly we tried to do stuff that was very intrinsic to the material and not just anything that they'd buy a license for. That policy has changed over the years. We got a lot of people submitting songs. They'd record demos. You know, Chewy, Chewy, Hand Me Your Comb was one of them, which was a take on a 1960s song from a show called 77 Sunset Strip, where the parking lot attendant was a hip kid with longish hair who was always combing it, and that was Kooky, Kooky, Hand Me Your Comb. And that was actually a hit novelty song back in the 50s. And yeah, we did not say yes to these songs. I'm sure there was a lot of other stuff, I can't remember it. One of the interesting things was our early licensee on posters and t-shirts and key rings and that kind of stuff was a company called Backers, etc. It was run by a guy named Harry Geisler. Harry, prior to this time, had been one of the biggest bootleggers of what you would think of as licensed merchandise around. And he decided to go legit. He'd made so much money. And he said to us, and I forget the exact percentages, so I'm making up these numbers, but it was something like, if he has to sign a contract with us, he'll give us a 3% royalty. If he can do it without signing a contract, he'll give us a 5% royalty. Because it just bothered him to actually have to sign a contract. It was so alien to his nature, and we decided we were all happier with a contract. There's a question over here.
How do you feel about the evil empire owning Lucas now?
How do I feel about the evil empire owning Lucas now? Well, I'll tell you, a lot of people have asked me that when it first happened and they were making the movie, and I said to them, I've known Kathy Kennedy since she was Steven Spielberg's assistant on Raiders of the Lost Ark. And I have a lot, and she's produced lots of movies since then. And I have a lot of faith in her. Larry Kasdan, of course, has a pretty good pedigree when it comes to both writing movies in general and Star Wars, having written or co-written The Empire Strikes Back. So I thought there was a really good chance it was in good hands. Different people have different opinions. I thought, my opinion is The Force Awakens is the third best Star Wars movie after Star Wars and Empire. I think it's better than Return of the Jedi and much better than will the movies continue to be great? I don't know.
Well, the fact that they're trying to put out like what, 2 a year?
I don't. There's all kinds of stories. There's going to be Star Wars movies, and then there's going to be Han Solo movies, and there's going to be this kind of movie. So, who knows exactly? Marvel's doing a pretty good job churning out an awful lot of movies about those characters. I'm dubious about how good all the DC movies are going to be, but they may be great. I haven't seen Batman versus Superman yet. I've heard mixed things about it. But, so far they've done a fine job. They've kept more or less arm's length on Star Wars. So I think it'll be fine. It isn't exactly like, the other movie studios are so much more quality assured and ethical. There was a time I did a consulting job for the science fiction publishing arm of the Church of Scientology. This was on some of L. Ron Hubbard's science fiction stuff, like nothing to do with the church, and I didn't have to do anything with the church. And people say, "Oh, you're working for them." And I said, "Well, first, I'm doing the opposite of most people. I'm taking their money." And second, at the same time, I was a consultant to Warner Brothers, which was literally owned by the mafia at that time. When they were Warner Brothers 7 Arts, 7 Arts was a company that owned parking lots all over the country. That's how they made their money. They were not choir boys. So, I was taking the mob's money working as a consultant to Warner Brothers. So I think, saying, "Oh, it's Disney, they're terrible." Shake their hand, count your fingers, and hope for the best. Yes? Speak up.
All the prequels, which one do you think is the most tolerant?
The prequels, the one I thought they got progressively less bad. That's just my opinion. So I think the third prequel, which is
the most tolerant.
yeah, Revenge of the Sith, was probably the best of them, but I don't really care for any of them. Yeah.
I was at the actual the Comic-Con that you talked about, and also the
In
WonderCon.
1976?
Yes, I was. And my question is, right after that, you guys, just when the movie opened in San Diego, just beforehand, you guys had a big campaign on the radio for tickets. Was that something that you guys worked on? Because it really, that place was sold out.
That would have been the studio and the exhibitors. I was completely unaware of it. I don't think any of us were involved. I think that was all done. You know, radio promotions, that kind of thing, are a staple of the studio business and distribution. Getting the local radio station, hey kids, call in, the 17th caller, I'll get 2 tickets. That's been going on for decades, and I'm sure we weren't directly involved with that. That was all through the studio. Yeah, Bob?
Can you tell us about working on the Dark Crystal?
That was good.
I can, but I'd rather stay on Star Wars today, especially with more questions. Let me take someone on the far side. We need to figure out how to give away those 2 posters. Yes, you, in the Jane hat.
Thank you. Talking about the marketing, before Star Wars days marketing, Sci-Fi Carpenter was always Star Trek. Star Trek kind of makes that a lot of bad examples of marketing. When I was thinking of that really crappy looking Spock helmet, what are those like? Would Star Trek kind of act as a what not to do guide for marketing?
Well, no, I mean, Star Trek was 10 years earlier,
Right.
and was television, and was completely different. We really didn't look a lot at Star Trek for specific things, other than knowing that, it's a good example that there's a really dedicated fan base for the right projects. And certainly we did not ignore Star Trek fandom as part of our marketing, because they're an obvious part of our audience, just like comic fans and science fiction fans in general. But in terms of specific details, no, not really. Yes, in the gray, and then I'll get you in the green.
I have 2 questions for you. One, I think I was at one of those Comic Cons, and I was also one of the original talkers. But we've already been told that like the marketing was a coup, where the merchandising rights, where they actually got the merchandising rights, and that was intelligent. Somehow they outplayed Fox. Was that really true, or did?
You mean how George ended up owning the merchandising?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Fox still participated in the finances of the merchandising, still collected money, and they actually wrote all the contracts. But merchandising was not a big deal in '76. George said he wanted to control the merchandising, and he wanted a big percentage of it, and he would take a lower directing fee. And Fox said, essentially, yeah, give him the merchandising. That's not worth anything. Because, while there'd been merchandising back certainly to the 20s and 30s, or Little Orphan Annie and Mickey Mouse watches and stuff, it was never huge. It was never the way it became on, since Star Wars. Star Trek had a lot of merchandising, but even that was not that enormous at the time. Over time, Star Trek merchandising grew much bigger. And
Yeah, how much did Ellen... Oh, I'm sorry.
No, the fellow in green's been waiting.
What was your most tedious project for Star Wars for advertising?
The most tedious? In one sense, because it was so overwhelming, I was also in charge of dealing with all the fan mail we got. and I hired a staff to process it. We went and looked at fan mail processing companies, and I interviewed a bunch of them and didn't like their attitude about the people who wrote fan mail. They thought they were little kids and jerks, and you just dealt with them and sent them on their way. And that's not the attitude we wanted. So we opted instead to do it all in-house. And like I say, I hired a staff of science fiction fans to work in our mailroom. We had a special fan mail room as opposed to the company mail room. And I wrote, I don't know, 18 different form letters, because a lot of the mail was kind of repetitive. Stuff that was addressed to specific actors went out to those actors to process their own. We didn't, write letters for Mark Hamill. Peter Cushing was a very dear, sweet man, and he would call me occasionally and say, "I've run out of my, 8x10 photos." People kept asking him for photos. "Would it be possible to get any?" And like, "Yes, Peter, yes, I'll send you all you want, don't worry." But, so we had, this dozen or dozen and a half form letters. And then anything that wasn't a form letter, one of the staff would respond to in some appropriate way. And if they asked for Darth Vader's autographed photo, if they asked for James Earl Jones or David Prowse, it went to James or David. If they asked for Darth Vader, that was generally a kid, not an adult, writing to Darth Vader. But if they asked for that, we had a photo of Darth Vader, an 8x10 photo of Darth Vader standing sort of like this. And I autographed all of those. From 1977 to 1980, anything that said Darth Vader was signed by me. And actually, when I was in Spain, they kept coming up to me after my talk to ask me to sign Darth Vader's autograph. And I had to remember what it looked like. Yeah.
How much did Alan Ladd help you guys out there at the very end of it all?
Well, Alan Ladd Jr.
Right.
Not Alan Ladd, the movie star, but Alan Ladd Jr., the head of 20th Century Fox, was the savior of Star Wars. He's the one who decided we're going to make this movie. He's the one who took the chance on it. And the rest of the senior executives at Fox were very leery about it until like September or October, something like that. Don't quote me on the month, but something you might remember, Bob, because Charlie posted the letter about it.
Yes.
But the head of distribution for Fox saw a rough cut, and he went nuts for the movie, wrote to all the other executives, sent them memos saying how this movie is going to be a huge hit. And he was just, he suddenly was on board, and many of the rest of the executives came on board as well. But Ladd was on board from the beginning. It was his decision and his alone to make the movie.
So he didn't have to pay for that. I mean, he didn't like lose his career at the end of it, right?
Right, because he made a movie that no one else wanted to make that made a huge amount of money. No, that does not end your career. If it had tanked, yeah.
I always wonder, when you do a marketing research, do you do it only inside the U.S. or also internationally? Because I'm from Kuwait,
Well, you do all kinds of research. Back then, the domestic market for films was like 75% of the box office, so they were mostly concerned with what the American box office was going to be. Also, the audience you will get internationally will be driven by how successful the film was in the United States. Even today, where it's much less important, American box office is maybe half of a film's potential, sometimes even less than that. It still kind of drives how the international audience will pay, will book it and see it and pay because it gets all the marketing, especially with the internet. Now with the internet, everyone all over the world knows 8 minutes after anything happens. So it's become much more important. Yeah, one last question.
You work on the Christmas special?
No, I did not work on the Christmas special. That was not one of my projects. I did receive all of the drafts of the script of the Christmas special,
Which is why you
the holiday special, which was originally an hour long, and it wasn't that bad. I mean, you know, it was never going to be a fabulous thing, but it wasn't that bad. It was aimed at kids. It had that Boba Fett animated sequence. It had a few other things, and it was okay. And then the network said, you know, this movie is so big, we want to do a 90-minute special. And they wrote more stuff. And then they said, we want to do a 2-hour special. And they wrote more stuff. And I told the executive whose project it was that, you know, this isn't really very good, but it wasn't my project. I could not get involved and say to the network, we'd like you to make this better. And they want, and obviously they did a lot of stuff to promote the stars and the shows they had on the air. I don't think, what's her name, Maud,
The
Arthur was a big Star Wars fan insisting on being in it.
Yeah.
That was just to promote Maud. You know, so they were doing stuff like that. No, it's not very good. It's not quite as terrible as its image, but, and it's also, remember, it was done in 1977, where what the audiences were expecting was different as well. And I'm told my time is up, so let's just figure out how we can give out these 2 posters. Yeah. We have a lot of volunteers. Okay, this fella in red who asked one of the first questions, his hand's up there. See him, Jenny, about halfway back?
I will do a woogie for you.
Give him one of them.
I'll do woogies.
Okay. And you came here from Kuwait?
Yeah.
Give her the poster. I was once at a convention where they did a thing, who traveled the furthest to get here? It was up in Santa Rosa, Northern California. I said, I did. And they said, no, we've got people who came from like Chicago. I said, I flew 7,000 miles. I flew from LA to Washington, D.C., watched a movie, and flew back to Santa Rosa to come to this convention, and we were doing a test screening of The Dark Crystal. It was all in one day.